Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to Srimad Bhagatam class. Hopefully, during the week, you got a chance to read every day something from Bhagavatam. Good to take time with whomever you're with to hear at least a few shlokas, if not a chapter or so. And we've been discussing the first canto. We're today going to look at, if you're willing, the fourth chapter of the first canto, which is the appearance of Sri Nārada. And we had discussed last week some of the history of the Bhagavatam. And at Naiṣkarmyam, which incidentally means the place where nobody blinks, Naimisha, because ostensibly they're leaning into the topic and they don't want to miss even one syllable, so they don't close their eyes even to moisten the eye. They just stay fixed. That's the mood of hearing that's indicative of somebody who's advancing on the spiritual path. Srila Jiva Goswami in his Sandarbha says that one can ascertain for oneself how one's advancing on the path of bhakti by one's eagerness to hear. And the sages thereafter asked various questions of Sutta Goswami, whom they had established as the leader of the assembly. Vetatam samya tat sarvam tat vatastadanugrahat bruyu snigdasya shishasya guravo kuyam acyuta. They had told him that we accept you because of your having submissively heard from your gurus, and your mood is proper. Saumya means you're soft-hearted, submissive, open to hear. And they felt very comfortable then, having established him as the speaker, to ask him various questions. They had asked him about how the Lord appears in the world. And in the last chapter, we're treated to a list of some of the avatars, those literally who cross down to this realm. Even though they're from the transcendental realm, they come here to display their pastimes. And when they do so, mananugrahaya bhaktanam manusham deham astitaḥ, the verse I'm quoting now pertains to Kṛṣṇa, manusham deham astitaḥ, even he comes, Swayam Bhagavan, the source of all the avatars. And because of that, we have someone to meditate on. His activities are transcendental. And so are all the avatars. In fact, benediction is given there in the last chapter that if you recite the appearance of these avatars of the Lord in the morning and the evening, then you'll no longer be subjected to the miseries of life. Simple formula, but someone may say, well, I don't have time for all that, which is compared to someone trying to cut a tree with a dull axe, being asked to take a moment to sharpen it and saying, I don't have time for that either. And in chapter 4, we're hearing directly about the appearance of Nārada Muni. And the first verse in this chapter is noteworthy. It's good to mark down. It gives a definition of realization, and it helps us to understand the mode of teaching the Bhagavatam to others. So I'll read this verse. Vyāsa uvaca iti brūvānam samstuya muninam dirga satrinam ridha kula pati sutam ba vricha shaunako ravit. So Vyasa uvacha, Vyāsadeva said, iti is a quotation mark, ruvanam, speaking samstuya, muninam. This is on hearing Sutta Goswami speak, Shaunaka Muni, who is the elderly learned leader of all the rishis engaged in that prolonged sacrificial ceremony, congratulated Sutta Goswami by addressing him as follows. Satrinam, those engaged in the performance of sacrifice, Vridha, elderly, Kulapati, head of the assembly, Sutam, under Sutta Goswami, Bahuricha, learned, Shaunakaha, of the name Shaunaka, abravit. In a meeting of learned men, when there are congratulations or addresses for the speaker, the qualifications of the congratulator should be as follows. He must be the leader of the house and an elderly man. He must be vastly learned also. Sri Shaunaka Rishi had all these qualifications, and thus he stood up to congratulate Sri Sutta Goswami when he expressed his desire to present Srimad Bhagatam exactly as he heard it from Shukadeva Goswami and also realized it personally. Personal realization does not mean that one should, out of vanity, attempt to show one's own learning by trying to surpass the previous acharya. He must have full confidence in the previous acharya, and at the same time, he must realize the subject matter so nicely that he can present the matter for the particular circumstances in a suitable manner. The original purpose of the text must be maintained. No obscure meaning should be screwed out of it, yet it should be presented in an interesting manner for the understanding of the audience. This is called realization. The leader of the assembly, Shaunaka, could estimate the value of the speaker, Sri Sutta Goswami, simply by his uttering yataditam and yatamati, and therefore he was very glad to congratulate him in ecstasy. No learned man should be willing to hear a person who does not represent the original acharya. So the speaker and the audience were bona fide in this meeting where Bhagavatam was being recited for the second time. That should be the standard of recitation of Bhagavatam so that the real purpose can be served without difficulty. Unless this situation is created, Bhagavatam recitation for extraneous purposes is useless labor both for the speaker and for the audience. Shaunaka uvacha, sutta sutta mahabhaga, varano varatam vara, katam bhagavatim punyam yad aha bhagavan chukaha. Shaunaka uvacha, Shaunaka speaking, sutta sutta, O Sutta Goswami. That's nice, sutta sutta. Mahabhaga, the most fortunate. Vada, please speak. Na, unto us. Vadatam, of those who can speak. Vada, respected. Katam, message. Bhagavatim, of the Bhagavatam. Punyam, pious. Yat, which. Aha, said. Bhagavan, greatly powerful. Shukaha. Shaunaka said, O Sutta Goswami, you are the most fortunate and respected of all those who can speak and recite. Please relate the pious message of Srimad Bhagatam, which was spoken by the great and powerful sage, Shukadeva Goswami. Prabhupada's purport. Sutta Goswami is twice addressed herein by Shaunaka Goswami out of great joy, because he and the members of the assembly were eager to hear the text of Bhagavatam uttered by Shukadeva Goswami. They were not interested in hearing it from a bogus person who would interpret it in his own way to suit his own purpose. Generally, the so-called Bhagavatam reciters are either professional readers or so-called learned impersonalists who cannot enter into the transcendental personal activities of the Supreme Person. Such impersonalists twist some meanings out of Bhagavatam to suit and support impersonalist views. And the professional readers at once go to the 10th canto to misexplain the most confidential part of the Lord's pastimes. Neither of these reciters are bona fide persons to recite Bhagavatam. Only one who is prepared to present Bhagavatam in the light of Shukadeva Goswami, and only those who are prepared to hear Shukadeva Goswami and his representative are bona fide participants in the transcendental discussion of Srimad Bhagavatam. Text 3. Kasmin yuge pravrityeyam stane va kena hetuna kutta sanjodita Kṛṣṇa kritavan samitam muni. Kasmin, in which yuge, period, pravrita, was begun, iyam, this, stane, in the place, va, or, kena, on what, hetuna, ground, kutta, wherefrom, sanchodita, inspired by, Kṛṣṇa, Dvaipayana Vyāsa, kritavan, compiled, samhitam, Vedic literature, munihi, the learned. In what period and what place was this first begun, and why was this taken up? From where did Kṛṣṇa Dvaipayana Vyāsa, the great sage, get the inspiration to compile this literature? Purport. Because Srimad Bhagavatam is a special contribution of Srila Vyāsadeva, there are so many inquiries by the learned Shaunaka Muni. It was known to them that Srila Vyāsadeva had already explained the text of the Vedas in various ways up to the Mahabharata for the understanding of less intelligent women, Shudras, and fallen members of the family of twice-born men. Srimad Bhagavatam is transcendental to all of them because it has nothing to do with anything mundane. So the inquiries are very intelligent and relevant. Tasya putro mahayogi samadrin nirvikalpakaha ekanta matir unidro gudho mudha iveyate. Tasya, his, putra, son, mahayogi, a great devotee, samadrik, equibalanced, nirvikalpakaha, absolute monist, ekantamati, fixed in monism or oneness of mind, unidra, surpassed nescience, gudha, not exposed, mudha, stunned, iva, like, iyate, appears like. His, Vyasadeva's son, was a great devotee, an equibalanced monist, whose mind was always concentrated in monism. He was transcendental to mundane activities, but being unexposed, he appeared like an ignorant person. Srila Shukadeva Goswami was a liberated soul, and thus he remained always alert, not to be trapped by the illusory energy. In the Bhagavad Gita, this alertness is very lucidly explained. The liberated soul and the conditioned soul have different engagements. The liberated soul is always engaged in the progressive path of spiritual attainment, which is something like a dream for the conditioned soul. The conditioned soul cannot imagine the actual engagements of the liberated soul. When the conditioned soul thus dreams about spiritual engagements, the liberated soul is awake. Similarly, the engagement of a conditioned soul appears to be a dream for the liberated soul. A conditioned soul and a liberated soul may apparently be on the same platform, but factually they are differently engaged, and their attention is always alert, either in sense enjoyment or in self-realization. The conditioned soul is absorbed in matter, whereas the liberated soul is completely indifferent to matter. This indifference is explained as follows. So we're hearing about Shukadeva, Vyasadeva's son. He was fully detached from the material world. And the next verse, after I read this, then we'll have some discussion. Drishvanu yantam rishim atmajam apyanang nagnam dvayo riya haridadur na sutasya chitram tad viksha pritshati manau jagadus javasti stripum bida natu sutasya vivikta drishte. Drishta, by seeing, anuyantam, following, Risham, the sage, atmajam, his son, api, in spite of, anagam, anagnam, not naked, devya, beautiful damsels, riya, out of shyness, paridadu, covered the body, not sutasya, of the sun, chitram, astonishing, tatvikshya, by seeing that, pritchati, asking, munau, unto the Muni, Vyāsadeva, Jagadu replied, tava, your, asti, there are, sri pum, male and female, bida, differences, not, two, but, sutasya, of the sun, vivikta, purified, drishte, of one who looks. While Srila Vyāsadeva was following his son, beautiful young damsels who were bathing naked covered their bodies with cloth, although Sri Vyāsadeva himself was not naked. But they had not done so when his son had passed. The sage inquired about this, and the young ladies replied that his son was purified, and when looking at them, made no distinction between male and female, but the sage made such distinctions. Purport. In the Bhagavad Gita 5.18, it is said that a learned sage looks equally on a learned and gentle brahmana, a chandala, dog-eater, a dog or a cow, due to his spiritual vision. Srila Shukadeva Goswami attained that stage. Thus he did not see a male or female. He saw all living entities in different dress. The ladies who were bathing could understand the mind of a man simply by studying his demeanor, just as by looking at a child one can understand how innocent he is. Shukadeva Goswami was a young boy, 16 years old, and therefore all the parts of his body were developed. He was naked also, and so were the ladies. But because Shukadeva Goswami was transcendental to sex relations, he appeared very innocent. The ladies, by their special qualifications, could sense this at once, and therefore they were not very concerned about him. But when his father passed, the ladies quickly dressed. The ladies were exactly like his children or grandchildren, yet they reacted to the presence of Vyāsadeva according to the social custom, because Srila Vyāsadeva played the part of a householder. A householder has to distinguish between a male and a female. Otherwise, he cannot be a householder. One should therefore attempt to know the distinction between body and soul without any attachment for male and female. As long as such distinction is there, one should not try to become a sannyasi like Shukadeva Goswami. At least theoretically, one must be convinced that a living entity is neither male nor female. The outward dress is made of matter by material nature to attract the opposite sex and thus keep one entangled in material existence. A liberated soul is above this perverted distinction. He does not distinguish between one living being and another. For him, they are all one and the same spirit. The perfection of this spiritual vision is the liberated stage, and Srila Shukadeva Goswami attained that stage. Srila Vyāsadeva was also in the transcendental stage, but because he was in the householder's life, he did not pretend to be a liberated soul as a matter of custom. And now we'll take some questions or reflections. Yes, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna Maharaj, the last purport, Maharaj, it says that Vyāsadeva was situated in Grihastha ashram, but Sukadeva Goswami was in Sannyasa ashram. But if you see Lord Chaitanya's Sannyas Leela, you see he was very strict with women. He did not even want to hear their names. So externally he showed very restraint to deal with women or kings as a sannyasi. But in this case it is said that, okay, a sannyasi can easily deal with. I did not understand that part. If you can actually clarify a little bit.
Is a specific circumstance. We know that Shukadeva had already been liberated within the womb. Kṛṣṇa had to come and convince him that it's okay to come out. But when he came out, he didn't take any chances. And anupetam, apeta-krityam, dvaipayano viraha kartara jubha. Apeta-krityam, he left without any of the formalities of taking the sacred thread or what to speak of sannyas. So the idea of sannyas here is not the varnashram version. It's the sense of him having categorically understood. I say understood because there's a way in which a true sannyas, not he who lights no fire, performs no work, is one who knows how to engage everything properly. And the sang means complete. Nyasa means where you place something. Like when you put on tilak, it's a nyasa. It goes here, 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 you know. And so there's a way in which a person who is oriented towards Kṛṣṇa and sees Īśavasyam idang sarvam yat kincha jagatyam jagat tena tyaktena bunjita magrada kasasudanam, that all energies belong to Kṛṣṇa. He understands the tattva. Tat means a particular category of energy one can point to. That's a demonstrative pronoun. You could say that is as described in the Vishnu Purana. There are different categories of energy. Tritiya Shaktirishate. 3 categories: internal, external, and marginal. So somebody who knows those perfectly then isn't obligated to come under their control, because he has understood that, as is described here in this purport, Prabhupada alludes to vidyavinaya sambhane brahmaniga vihastani, seeing the combination of matter and spirit. It doesn't see a male body, female body, sees beyond that. So that was the position of Shukadeva Goswami. And Vyāsadeva, although he's Vyāsadeva, still he was participating in the varnashram or society. Shukadeva had opted out. He signed the form, the opt-out form. Vyāsadeva, even though he's an incarnation of the Lord, hadn't. So there was a sense of the position of the two of them being different, as perceivable by the maidens who were bathing. Did that answer your question?
Yes, Maharaj. I just want to add one thing, Maharaj. Can it be said that because Sukadeva Goswami was in the Paramahansa Avadhuta stage, so the external rules and regulations of sannyas and other varnashrama,
Shukadeva.
yes, it's not subject to him. He's beyond it.
Yes. That's one of the verses in the 11th canto that we're just looking at now. What is it? How does that start?
Evang swartha parartha nishtha.
No. Just grab the shloka book really quick. When there's a shloka to be had, you should grab it as quickly as you possibly can. It mentions, Kṛṣṇa mentions there in the 11th canto that until one tavat karma kurvita nan nirvidyeta yavata matkata shravanadova sharayavan najayate, means tavat, until that time that one is liberated, one must participate in the varnashrama. But when one's come to the transcendental stage, it's not dependent on that anymore. Another question, 1, 2.
Hare Krishna Maharaj. Just a curious question. I was a bit surprised with the woman's ability to ascertain the Sukadeva Goswami's equal vision. So unless a person is self-realized, it's very difficult to ascertain the qualities of the great souls. Just wondering how they were able to make a differentiation between...
In this case, it's not an intellectual exercise. He wasn't given an SAT or anything like that. It's a natural or visceral experience when one meets somebody who's advanced spiritually. And it's perceivable in the effect that they have on us. For instance, in the 4th canto of the Srimad Bhagatam, in the mention of by Prithu Maharaj, that those who have purity of heart and speak have a different effect. The speech has a different effect on us than somebody else. As the sound that we make carries our consciousness, and we can perceive that and feel it. Therefore, we find when Prabhupada would meet audiences, people would feel compelled just by his presence. Once in Washington, D.C., I was there with a couple of godbrothers distributing books, and Prabhupada was to fly in, and this serviceman had purchased a book, and we told him that the author's coming in. And then all the devotees were there waiting for him at the gate, and there was a crowd, and when Prabhupada got off the plane, although his stature, materially speaking, seemed to be slight, as someone might say from a material point of view, he was short, there was a electricity in the air, so much so that the serviceman who was nearer to the back, he stood up on one of the chairs to see as Prabhupada came in, and then he saw the other devotees offer their obeisances, and he jumped off the chair and paid obeisance on the ground. What commanded that was the ambiance created. And you could see that he wasn't educated in the spiritual science, but there's a natural way in which people can feel the presence of somebody who's spiritually advanced. We had here and then there. I mean, Brajarath Bhavana and then Mukharavina, not here and then there.
May I ask 2 questions?
You may ask 2.
The first one, so it says...
but it'll cost a little extra.
It said, I think Sudha Goswami said that Shukadeva Goswami was an equibalanced monist, and in that, and I think the point was made in the next verse about how he was like this equibalanced monist because he saw everyone as the soul inside them. But Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he brought up this philosophy of acyuta-bhāvā-varjitaṁ. Is the Bhagavatam, was like Shukadeva Goswami in that same spirit where he also believed in that kind of philosophy, or did he have or did he not specify an outlook? Like, did Chaitanya Mahaprabhu make that distinction, or was that always there in the Bhagavatam?
That distinction means?
The acyuta-bhāvā-varjitaṁ, like explicitly mentioning that it's one and different.
Did Lord Chaitanya?
Did he bring that up from his own understanding of the Bhagavatam, or was that?
Are you when you say he, who are you
Chaitanya
talking?
Mahaprabhu? Did he take that out of the Bhagavatam himself?
It's an eternal truth.
Internal truth.
Yeah. As we find that there are various acharyas who brought up various versions of the understanding of our relationship, that is the soul's relationship. As is mentioned in the Shvetashvatara Upanishad, tree of the body, on the tree of the body, 2 birds. If you listen to the Mayavad version, they'll say, okay, well, there's 2 birds until the eating bird on the tree, which represents the living entity, and the witnessing bird, which represents the super soul, Kṛṣṇa, in the body. When that eating bird comes to full knowledge, then he realizes, oh, I am the other bird. But the acharyas, most notably, are emphasizing that there is a difference, and they do it in nuanced ways. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, as if a symphony director, bringing those various conceptions to a perfect pitch and complete understanding that's assimilatable and practicable for everyone. And you'll find in the Bhakti Samrita Sindhu the various relationships that we have with Krishna. The Shantaras, as described in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu and also the Chaitanya Charitamrita, when Lord Chaitanya is describing the different levels of relationship or rasa that living entities have with Krishna, just describe Shantaras, which is he describes as foundational, because there's a way in which at that point one understands asango hyayam purushaha, I have nothing to do with the material world. However, there isn't yet the impetus as a separate, although simultaneously one entity with Krishna to do service. That comes in the next level of dasya ras. So we find here this transformation. It's demonstrative in the beginning of the Bhagavatam and very purposeful, because Shukadeva Goswami was so detached from the material world, and this is leading up to the most important verse in this series of Atmaramaśchamunayo, Nigranta apyurukrame, that although he had nothing to do with the material world, and this is being proved over and over again in his relationship here in this verse that we ended on, that not only did he not see the difference between male and female, but they noticed it in him also. What to speak of if you hear him talk in the second canto of Srimad Bhagatam, he said, you don't need a plate. What do you need a plate for? Just use your hand. Bed? Just sleep on the ground. I mean, who could be more detached? He didn't even have clothes. He wasn't checking out the latest styles, not even, how big his shika was or anything like that. It was just not interested. And so the Bhagavatam is pointing out, Nigranta aprurukrame, that it starts from this level of Brahmabhuta prasanatma nashochati nakangshati samaksarveshu bhuteshu madbhaktim labate param. From that position, liberated position, then one can properly enter into bhakti. Shraddhanvito nashunu yadata varna yedya, as described in the 10th canto, in the last verse of the Uddhava Gita section. That's Vikriditam Rajabadurbirahamcha Vishnu Shraddhanvito nashunu yadata varna yedya bhaktim param bhagavati pratilabhya kamam hridrogamashva pahinotya charina tira. That those who have become foundationally situated in this liberated state, Shraddhanvito, they have a clear idea that I'm not part of the material world at all. And then by hearing the Srimad Bhagatam, the activities of Krishna in his relationship with the devotees in Vrindavan, very specifically here, Rajavadu, the gopis, then one can bhaktim param, one can be elevated to the highest level of bhakti. So starting from that liberated stage, Shukadeva Goswami then demonstrated that devotional service is beyond the modes of material nature, because he was beyond the modes of material nature. It was Mukaravind, right? Yes. Oh, second question. 2 for the price of 1.
In the first verse's purport, it talks about it talks about realization, and I was thinking of it from, let's say, from the second person perspective, where if I'm to hear someone or to read someone's book, how do I know that the original text is maintained if I don't fully understand the original text myself?
Just as in any epistemological context, one has to see who are the stewards of that. And as an example, some of our acharyas have pointed out that some of the Mahabharata has been interpolated, and therefore you'll find different versions. There's the South Indian version, and then there's a North Indian version. Somehow over time there's slight tweaks here and there culturally. But then someone may say, well, hey, wait a minute, Bhagavad Gita is there. So what about that? And the answer that Radhika Raman Prabhu gave to that question when he was here is that that's been under the watchful eye of all the acharyas. There's not one acharya who hasn't commentated upon the Bhagavad Gita. It goes for Srimad Bhagatam also. It's been watched very carefully. In fact, anytime there is a slight variation in any of the verses, which you'll find in the 6th canto and a few other places, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta will point out sometimes people say it like this, although it doesn't have any difference in meaning, but they're very careful, they're meticulous about pointing that out. So those who are the protectors of the message, the members of the disciplic succession and sampradaya, that is their business of representing it and carrying it forward in its perfect form. And so in any knowledge system, you could ask the same question. How do you know this has been passed down properly? And even in science, you'll find that there are checks and balances to some degree with those who are charged with passing it along. And there are certain markers that say, these are the tenets of the science that you're studying right now based on such and such and so and so. Thank you.
Maharaj, thank you so much. One of the answers that you're giving, that how when pure devotee speaks, that has different effect on the audience. So I have a question that Srila Prabhupada, before, I'm just giving an example, like Srila Prabhupada before coming to United States, he did preaching everything in India, but it was not having any tangible results. But the same thing when he did after coming here, there was so much tangible results. So what has changed? I don't think so Prabhupada is the same when he was in India, when he's here. So how does the speech made difference when he was in India and when he came?
Well, Prabhupada points out, he gives this example, as do the acharyas, that in order for conception to take place, there's a way that the male must be potent and the female must be fertile. Otherwise, if one is missing, then it's not going to produce a child. So in a similar way, although a pure devotee may speak, it's not that everyone's rushing to hear that class. When Kṛṣṇa was there in Pravas, there was only Uddhava, because although he was on his way to liberate the members of, what's that, way up north? Vaiśeṣika. He circled back because he couldn't be without Kṛṣṇa's association. He knew he was leaving the planet, so he went back to hear more. And then Maitreya came along, 2 people. There's Kṛṣṇa, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and there were 2 listening. And so the person has to be open and interested in hearing. And that goes back to Shraddhanvito Nashrindo Yadata Varna Yedya Bhaktim Param Bhagavati Pratilabhya Kamam. Shraddhanvito means that the faith has to be properly formed. Kṛṣṇa mentions this in the 17th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. He said, Shraddhayayam Purushaha, that every person is made of his or her faith. That's who you are. Nahi kashit shanamapi jatutishchatya karma krit karete havasha karma sarva prakriti jargunai. He says nobody can stop acting according to their nature in this world, even for a second. Even just fall asleep and you're still going to be do. You know, whatever's going on because of your conditioned nature, that's just going to go. And you can't stop it at any time, Kṛṣṇa says. And so there's a way in which those who Yesham tontakatam papam jñānam punya-karmanam te tvanda mohanir mukta bhajantimam dhridavrta. Those who have evolved and come to a point where they have some punya, bhakti unmukhi sukriti, they're interested, they want to hear it. Other people are not so much. I mean, you can experience this, go around and distribute the Bhagavad Gita in different places. Try downtown San Francisco. It's a little harder than, where'd you go recently where it was easy? It'd go to the Grand Canyon. And it's a little more natural setting, and people are there on vacation or whatever. Like, oh, wow, I'll take it. So, yeah, it's dependent on both. Who is next before Bali? Oh, yeah, it's Vaikuntha Nayaka Prabhu and then Bali Mardan Prabhu.
Dandavat Pranam, Guru Maharaj, all glories, Srila Prabhupada, all glories to you. Maharaj, we read in the purport about realization, where Srila Prabhupada says realization is about presenting the same truth in a way that the audience can connect. And you also talked about sannyasa, of not being, in the rigid sense of the varnashram, not giving up things. And you mentioned how we have to use sannyasi uses everything for Kṛṣṇa. So I guess this idea of yukta vairagya and phalgu vairagya, this is what we are talking about, I believe. So I had a question on this, because I met one Orthodox Brahmin in Mysore, and we were discussing, and he was taking great pride in saying, in our kitchen we use firewood. We don't actually, and we are just doing it the traditional way. And his logic was that if we deviate a bit, that one deviation will lead to another deviation, and in some time you don't even realize how much you have changed, that it does not look like the original thing at all. So my question was that this yukta vairagya, phalgu vairagya, how do we find the balance? How do we know that, okay, this is a departure we are doing, which is bona fide, which will be accepted, while this kind of departure which we are doing from our predecessors is not really authorized, right? While that firewood example seems extreme, I did see some value in what he said, that how to retain the authenticity of the movement. So if you could kindly highlight on this.
Yes, thank you, Vaikuntha Naya, for such an important question. And really, it's the theme of the questions of the sages at Naiṣkarmyam. Find they're asking, Urini buddhi karmani shrotavyani vibhagasha atasadyo trayatsaram samudrita madishaya bruhi bhadraya bhutanam amritat kalpate. They ask that there's so many scriptures and so many ideas about what to do and what not to do. Buddhini buddhi karmani shrotavyani vibhagasha. You hear all these things. So he said, tell us the essence. What's the main thing that we're supposed to do? And that comes as savai pumsam paro dharmo yato bhakti radhoksaje haitukya pratiyata yayatma suprasidati. That one should render unmotivated, uninterrupted service to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. This is the gold standard. And we find so many examples in the Bhagavatam where this is being starkly pointed out. For instance, when Kṛṣṇa and his friends are in the forest, and his friends say, Kṛṣṇa, we're hungry. We need a little something. And he says, stop in and ask the brahmanas. They're getting ready to perform a sacrifice. There's plenty of food being prepared. It's an okay time right now to ask for it. And so they went in, and the brahmanas ignored the children, even though Kṛṣṇa had said, you go in and ask, not in my name, because I'm a Vaishya. Ask in Balaram's name, he's a Kshatriya, so they may honor that. And they didn't honor anything. They didn't even acknowledge the boy's existence. They didn't even say anything. They pretended they didn't exist. And these are supposed to be the ones who are the protectors of the Vedic system. And then when they go to the wives of the Brahmins, the wives are perfectly pure devotees. So the boys just mention the name of Kṛṣṇa and Balaram, and by that part of the sentence, they're already gathering together everything and running to the forest to make offerings to Kṛṣṇa, because they've understood the absolute truth. So if one misses, as the Bhagavatam points out, the purpose of the Bhagavatam, just as another example, when Romaharshan, he knew everything. And we do meet people like that, right? It's like, yeah, I know everything. He actually did know everything, except the main thing, or the most important thing, which is who's Krishna, who's God. He didn't know that part. Neither did Jarasandha. He was a highly learned Vedic scholar, and he did all the mantras, and he used all the right wood, but he tried to kill Krishna. And so the Bhagavatam over and over again is saying, don't miss the point. And what is the essence? So when we get down to that, presenting the essence is the business of the acharyas, and those who represent the acharyas is to bring what is most important. And yena tena prakarena mana Krishna niveshayat. There's a way in which one, as Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, man mana bhavama bhakto, just think of me, and know how to do that. So one may have the right wood and then forget Krishna. One may have the wrong wood and remember Krishna. Which one's better? Oma pavitra pavitrova sarvavastan katopiva yasmaret pundarikaksham sabhaya pyantara shuchihi. One may be in any weird condition of life, and there are lots of weird conditions of life. But if you remember Krishna, then you become purified inside and out. So we have to know which aspects to emphasize of the Vedas, and that all comes out in the Bhagavatam, which is giving the very essence of all the Vedas. That's the point. And Bali Mardan Prabhu.
Hare Krishna. So I have one reflection and a question. So let me go with the reflection. So I think comparing also by Vaikuntha Nayak Prabhu and Brajrasa Bhavan. So in Jagannath Puri, there is a book called Madala Panji, which is the sections which describes about even the menu of Lord Jagannath, what item, let's say one dal, then what kind of spices to be used, it has been described and various things. So it has given also some psychology, and some of the extracts coming from Garud Puran, he tells about the psychology of the animals. By seeing, you will know their mood. For example, by seeing the tongue of the snake, you know that he's going to bite or not. By seeing the movement of the tail, you can see the joyousness of a dog. And by seeing the movement of the head of a cow, Chatuspadi, then you will know that what is the movement. So basically, when you go for a driver training in India, they tell you that if the cow or goat is heading, then they will come break your car because there is no signal. So this gives some anecdote on that. So the reason I'm saying about Vyāsadev's and Sukadeva Goswami's observation by the woman. So actually it is mentioned in Vishwanath Chakravarti's the Tika also. He has said, because the woman sees the movement of Vyasadev's leg got stopped when he saw the naked woman in the pond. That means he was, and Sukadeva Goswami is going freely. There was no movement of checking of his leg movement. But Vyasadeva got stopped. He said, my God, I came into the wrong place. So that means he made the distinction. And by that movement, and that triggered from the movement of the leg, that triggered to his mind and the face and the eyes, that reflected the woman to react what they wanted to cover up themselves. That was the whole episode of these things. How, because they are not a psychologist or something by seeing, he's Vyasadeva, he's Sukadeva Goswami, but by the movement of the body and the gesture in the mind that reflected them. So one of my question is, as it has been said in Prabhupada's many purport, the 10,000 years, the movement will stop, means the last is gone and all. So is Bhagavatam, the book or Bhagavatam knowledge, is going to stay after those 10,000 years? or that will retain end of the Kali Yuga, or the people will have the opportunity of the Bhagavatam book, because we are doing so much Bhadra campaign. So it is an opportunity until 10,000 years or post end of Kali Yuga, the Bhagavatam book or the knowledge will remain. Just what is your insight?
Well, I don't have my own insight, but the Brihat Bhagavatamrita discusses how Bhagavatam is an eternal vibration. It just gets represented. It's always there. And it's the prerogative of Kṛṣṇa and his devotees to make it available at the right times in human society. So that's why it's worth the effort, especially now in Kali Yuga. Things seem to be moving along quite nicely in the Kali Yuga. So it's hard to predict. Well, it's not hard to predict. We're reading the 12th canto of the Bhagavatam now and getting a lot of predictions that seem to have already manifested. And so Krishna is always available. The devotees are always available somewhere. Sometimes, as Bhagavatam says, sometimes they speak. This is in the section of the descriptions of autumn. It's mentioned just as a waterfall. Sometimes it pours forth water, other times it's silent, it doesn't have any water. So similarly, the great devotees, sometimes they're speaking and it's pouring forth. And at other times they remain silent according to the circumstances. So it really depends on Krishna's will and how it unfolds. If you want that service, you can probably put in for it. Stick around for 10,000 years and see how it goes. Interesting things will happen, I'm sure. Okay. Yes. Right?
So this was a question which was asked online to an earlier class. The question is, what is the difference between perfect knowledge and complete knowledge? Since no one ever knows Krishna completely, but apparently can know him perfectly.
It's somewhat semantic, the difference, although we do like to use semantics to expand the glorification of the Lord at different levels, like there's perfect, more perfect, and most perfect. That description of how Dwarka is perfect, Mathura is more perfect, and Vrindavan is the most perfect. And if there's a reference to if there's a reference the person is referring to of complete and perfect, I would answer the question based on the reference, on the context of that. Although you could just say that every level of Krishna consciousness, everybody's Krishna conscious to some degree. There's Annamoy, Pranamoy, Manomoy, Jñānamoy, Vijñānamoy, Anandamoy. There are these different levels of consciousness of living entities in different bodies that the Shastra describes, and they're all levels of connection to Krishna. A plankton in the ocean is connected to Krishna, the soul within that body of a plankton, by eating, although at a very minimal level. And a human being who has come in contact with devotional service is at another level altogether. And so there may be complete knowledge, as Krishna gives in the Bhagavad Gita, Manushyanam sahasreshu kasyad yatati siddhaye yatatamapi siddhanam kasyam mambeti tattvata. He says, out of millions of people, hardly one is interested in spiritual life, and of those who are practicing spiritual life, even somebody might have a conception of the material world's not my home, I'm not my body, and so forth, but it's not perfect. And that's one of the discussions in the 5th chapter that we're coming to. When Nārada Muni meets Vyāsadeva, Vyāsadeva is not satisfied with what he's done so far. And he's given for many a complete explanation of spiritual life, but it's not perfect. Naiṣkarmyam acyuta-bhāvā-varjitaṁ śobhate jñānam alaṁ Nirañjanam Kutaḥ punaḥ abhadram īśvare cārpitaṁ karma akāraṇam. This is one of the points that Nārada makes to Vyāsadeva. He said, okay, you've talked about Naiṣkarmyam. Okay, here's how you escape the material world and the obligation to work according to karma. Naiṣkarmyam acyuta-bhāva-varjitaṁ śobhate jñānam alaṁ Nirañjanam. You also may have this conception of that you're not your body and so forth. He said, but that's not perfect because it's not beautiful. And unless it's beautiful by being connected to acyuta-bhāva, meaning that you have love for Kṛṣṇa, then whatever level of so-called completeness that you've achieved, ravindākṣa vimukta-māninas asta-bhāvād aviśuddha-buddhayaḥ āruhya kṛcchreṇa paraṁ tataḥ nādṛta-yuṣmad-aṅghrayaḥ, by the standard of the Srimad Bhagatam. By other people's standard, it may be complete, but Bhagavatam says it's not perfect. And if it's not perfect, it's not going to hold. His soul wants perfect. And the only way to get that is to get Kṛṣṇa. Yes, Prabhu.
So when I was in Kanpur last week, I quoted this verse, Naiṣkarmyam api acyuta-bhāva-varjitaṁ, and Mahakumbha Mela was starting practically that same day, same week. And so a devotee asked quite intelligently that although this is the verse which is mentioned in Bhagavatam, why is it that at a festival like Mahakumbha Mela there's such a high density of people more inclined towards an impersonal philosophy rather than a personalist philosophy?
It's rarer. Manushyanam sahasreshu kashid yatiti siddhaye. There are gradations of people who are interested in spiritual life. And siddhana means only the perfect ones come to complete knowledge, and then perfect knowledge. So the impersonal conception means that you haven't got the rarefied association of pure devotees. And that's a great fortune, because only by the association of those who have complete knowledge and also a complete relationship with Kṛṣṇa can we also be elevated to that position. So it's rarer. And the impersonal conception is more or less the default mode for the material world. I mean, Kṛṣṇa says that himself, because Arjuna asks him in the 12th chapter, which is better? And then Kṛṣṇa says, Klesho dikartarastesham avyakta sakta chetasam avyakta hi gatir dukam dehavadbir avapyate. Personal conception is better. The other one really is a lot of trouble for nothing and a lot of suffering involved. He said, but if somehow or other you can stick it out in the impersonal conception over a long period of time, although it's very troublesome, if you're really, really, really lucky, you can come to the personal conception. So we're under the banner of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, who miraculously gave out this personal conception to the masses, and even to people that seemed unqualified. Anarpita charim chirat karuni avatirna kalau. Lucky thing it's Kali Yuga. He came and said, oh, just give it out for free. What's he giving out? The personal conception of worshiping God as Radha and Kṛṣṇa and as Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So although it's really, really rare, in Kali Yuga you can get it wholesale. Because Lord Nityananda, we just read, he's giving it out wholesale. He opened a wholesale market to give out that personal conception. And you see it because you go in Sankirtan. I mean, most people have no idea what's going on. They're just getting ready to go watch a football game. And what does that mean? They're just immersed in the modes of material nature, have no idea. But when you come walking along and say, hi, and we have photographic evidence of people going to buy a six-pack of beer, go to the game, and they end up with a Bhagavatam set instead. You just imagine what happens when they come home. Okay, where's the beer? Larry? Larry's like, I don't know, I get this instead. Let's open it up and see what's in there. And somebody who gets that, miraculously, and we find Bhakta Larry's all over the planet, or Bhakta Dilip, or whomever it is. It wasn't even an impersonal conception of God, just going to get a six-pack of beer and ended up with a Bhagavatam set. And the association of devotees at a festival, they'd run into Vishnu Jana and his kirtan festival and just say, hey, it's a party, let's jump in. And next thing you know, they're taking prasad and somebody's sitting with them and they say, hey, what is this anyway? Like, yeah, we just eat and dance, and next day they're at a Bhagavatam class, and one thing leads to another. This is the potency of devotional service. So yeah, most people have incomplete knowledge of the complete whole. And that's what Prabhupada says, that this is the problem. And that's the problem that Nārada Muni is telling Vyāsadeva. He's saying, I understand your strategy here. I see where you're trying to go with this. You don't want to alienate anybody, right? Because most people, this is the point. When you're teaching Krishna consciousness anywhere, where the rubber meets the road is God a person or not? And you may notice this, everyone may notice this when you're teaching. Do you want to actually bring that up? I mean, when do you bring it up? When are you going to broach the subject? Like, you can use all kinds of nomenclature to talk about spirit and matter and this and that. I gave a class recently somewhere, and then one of my god siblings came up and said, you should talk more about the personality of Godhead. And I felt like Vyāsadeva and Nārada Muni. Because that's just what's going on here. Vyasadeva's trying to like, yeah, so there's energies and, this and that. It's like, yeah, but, move it along. And not many people have that in the material world. If it weren't for the pure devotees, Bhaktivinoda Thakur and Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur and Srila Prabhupada boldly coming and presenting in such a way that people have access to this, not just the knowledge, but also the practice. And then it becomes ingrained in people's hearts. Devotees practice, and then they wonder, is this real? They go to Vrindavan, they have an experience for themselves, and they say, it's real. And there's an evolution. So we're creating, by the mercy of the disciplic succession, a wave of this perfect knowledge so that people can take to pure devotional service, which means have a relationship in Dāsa, Sakhya, Vatsalya, Madhurya, by the mercy of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Okay, we have two last questions that I'm going to answer in under a minute each, and first one goes to Yashoda Kripa.
Hare Krishna. Thank you, Maharaj. So the last point that you mentioned about preaching and bringing the Krishna's name at the right point, this is something I personally struggle with. And over the time I have realized that maybe I was just not doing justice with keeping Krishna's name or direct preaching or direct name in the background, because coming to the conversation between Vyāsadeva and Nārada, we see that it's most influential, most impactful if we directly bring and glorify Krishna's name. So how do I strike a balance between the two when I talk to new people?
Yeah, that's a good question, and that's the question. And that's what comes up in the purport that we read, the first verse, purport. Prabhupada said this is the art. This is what's called realization. When you have your own realization, to the degree that you have realization, you can give context to people. And that's how I would describe the process of bringing up the personality of God in all this, is making sure that you build enough context so that it doesn't alienate them. Because when you even use nomenclature and you assume they know what it means, you can alienate them. So in teaching, you have to notice the audience, what their frame of reference is, and then just describe it using analogy and assuming nothing. Assume they don't know anything. And when we speak like that, oftentimes people then begin to appreciate. And also, I just say as a principle that I've noticed is that it's kind of fun to take risks and cross that line, even if you think it's slightly premature. Just see what happens. After all, you can always go to another part of the city to preach if it doesn't work out. Find another group. But what we're finding is that when we bring that up, if you're very confident about it and you have your own realization and you speak about it, then people are often charmed. And we've seen that before. We're too reticent, and then people come and they confront us and say, hey, where's the rest of it? And by the way, give me some of those beads, and where's all the other stuff? You guys are hiding something from me. So you can always experiment by bringing it out and noticing what happens. Okay, last point. Mayapur Bihari Prabhu.
Hare Krishna Maharaj. Thank you for the wonderful class. Maharaj, you're talking about Vyāsadeva and Narad Muni advising him that all the scriptures are fine, but about Bhagavatam you should write. So similarly, there is a lot of things mentioned in the scriptures, and recently I find that everything can be justified. Oh, but this is also mentioned in scripture, artha, kama, moksha, and everything. Recently I find that I personally don't believe much in Jyotish or Vastu, but many more senior devotees than me, many more devotees well versed in scriptures, they are following Vastu so thoroughly I get confused. Am I missing something? And then I feel that, to some other question, that are we diverting? It is chant and be happy, not Vastu and be happy. So, but at the same time, such things are mentioned in the scripture. So how do we interpret, or what should be our steps while following such things?
That's why we have a Guru Parampara. There's people on the planet that were around Prabhupada. For instance, we just had opportunity to hear from Shrutikirti Prabhu when we were in the GEV. He gave an hour-long lecture, at least an hour long. And there was a sense we got from him, okay, this was Prabhupada's mood. This is how he talked about particular topics. Who would know best? Somebody who was right there. And there are others still walking. Why go to the database immediately or try to extract things in that way without also cross-referencing with people who are actually there? So what you get in a Guru Parampara system is the fleshing out of the entire philosophy, in a sense that, yes, there's the intellectual aspect, you can study it in the Shastras and so forth, but then you want to come down to the point of what was the mood, and what did the Acharya say, and how did the Acharya deal with it? And then you have this very stable position of becoming a Stita Deer Muni. The normal Munis are defined as those who always try to find an alternative meaning. It's the same way in academics. If you go into any academic subject, especially English, you're supposed to come out with your own idea about what the poem means, or you read a book and then give a unique explanation about what Dostoevsky was talking about. And that's where you score points. And this is the Muniism of the Veda culture also. You find thousands of Munis, really intelligent people, they come up with a philosophy that's different than somebody else. So they can fly a little flag at Kumbh Mela and say, we have our camp over here. And the Stita Muni has a grounding in the Acharya Upasanam. There's a way in which we worship the Acharyas as the prominent spokespersons for the philosophy, and therefore, when it comes down to, like, okay, modern day ISKCON, and you say, over on this side of the spectrum, with, I'm not going to say any particular things because I don't want to offend anybody, with the V word or with the A word, astrology, Vastu, all these things. It's helpful to say, what was Prabhupada's mood about it? So, for instance, Pradyumna was there. Pradyumna is a scholar. He was Prabhupada's Sanskrit editor. And he traveled with him everywhere he went. So he watched Prabhupada every day, and he knew it. And he also asked questions, thankfully. So he said, Prabhupada, what about astrology? Is it part of our Siddhanta? Prabhupada said, no, it's not part of our Siddhanta, but if you find out it's going to rain, you bring an umbrella. So, yes, but no. I mean, no, but yes. Not so much, but it's there. And if it becomes useful to you to go out and do Sankirtan, because you know you're going to need an umbrella on that day, then that's the application. Not that it's science that will help us to become more Krishna conscious or something like that, necessarily. My main point is that Prabhupada had certain ways of applying all these principles, and if we just find out what those were and don't try to be more Catholic than the Pope, we'll be in a good position. You don't have to, you shouldn't do less, and you don't have to do more to prove yourself. You have to stick with the main thing. The main thing is to keep the main thing the main thing. And that's what the acharyas do. That's what Prabhupada did. He kept it main. When it came to performing yagyas, Pradyumna talks about how there was information coming in about how to do this way, that way. And he was concerned, so he was asking Prabhupada. This was circa 1975 in Chicago. It was a huge affair there. There were 4 or 5 sets of new Gaura-Nitāya deities being installed, 150 devotees getting initiated. All the Radha-Damodar buses were there. What's the yajna going to be like? This way, that way, this way. And then he asked Prabhupada, and Prabhupada leaned over and he said, shortcut. So if we find out what the mood is, and we don't do it less and we don't do it more, if Prabhupada said, look into it a little bit more, like with deity worship, he said, I want Hari Bhakti Vilas, but maybe, I forget how many pages, but it was a really truncated amount, like 40 pages or something. Hari Bhakti Vilas has millions of different things you can do. And even in the padditis we have now, when you set up paraphernalia, you do a puja for the bell. You do a puja for the conch. You do a puja for the conch holder. Everything has to have a yantra underneath it. I mean, you could go on forever. And if you start making all the Madhuparka and the Achmaniya and everything like that, I know people have done that. And they didn't have time for anything else. And so Prabhupada emphasized, he said, put Gaura-Nitāya in your house, or Panchatattva. And how do you worship him? He said, with Sankirtan. That's keeping the main thing. What was his mood? So being aware of that and not get carried away one way or the other, and also not disrespecting the fact that, there are interesting and important aspects of it, and it can be used, that knowledge can be used for good effect in spreading the Sankirtan movement, then to that degree, take it. That was Prabhupada's mood. So that brings us to the end of our discussion for this morning on Srimad Bhagavatam.